time travel, Star Trek First Contact, and the franchise after Star Trek First Contact. Did it alter the timeline? Are we getting now a Star Trek from an alternate timeline created by First Contact? This is the theory that I want to talk about today, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you like, and let's get into it.
Sensors show chronometric particles emanating from the sphere.
They're creating a temporal vortex.
Time travel.
Data, report.
We appear to be caught in a temporal wake.
In Star Trek First Contact, the 8th film in the Star Trek franchise, the Borg go back in time to alter Earth's history so that the Federation and the Enterprise aren't created and they can easily invade. By going back in time, they are causing the events to change. We see this in the film. What we don't see is how any changes that were caused by the Borg going back, even though they were defeated, affected the timeline. When the Enterprise goes back, it is simply the universe as we know it. Or is it? After this, we had Star Trek Enterprise Season 2 and an episode called Regeneration, where the Borg that crash-landed from the Borg sphere on Earth come back to life and try and get back to the Borg Collective. They managed to send a message. But did these interactions with the Borg cause the Federation to advance more quickly out of fear of the Borg coming back? Out of this species, this warning, Captain Archer would have written a report on the Borg, or at least an unknown threat, seeing as they conveniently didn't say Borg. I've always had an issue with that. So what we're talking about is Star Trek Enterprise and everything after it not technically being the same universe. Like throwing a rock into water, the splash is where the most changes are. So we'd see it in Enterprise, we would see it in Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and then as it goes further and further in the timeline, it smooths out. So by the time we get to the TNG era and the end of First Contact, the universe is essentially the same with a few alterations and changes. So that means that the timeline has changed for us, and it's almost identical for the Star Trek The Next Generation crew, who would be from the original timeline, and obviously there's not enough changes for them to notice the timeline change. But as an audience, we notice these changes by looking at Star Trek Enterprise after that, with the temporal Cold War constantly changing things, and when we get to Discovery and Strange New Worlds, we see that the timeline has changed to them being slightly more advanced, the Federation's a bit more battle ready. So maybe in the future, this is what happens. Now, my views on this theory is it's interesting. I don't really care about aesthetic changes in terms of the Star Trek franchise, which is what Discovery and Strange New Worlds and Picard are. They're a different production team doing different things with the same content. The Klingon Redesign is a clear example. They did it once before in the motion picture. They explained that in Enterprise. That doesn't mean that that wasn't a huge continuity error for decades. It just means they decided to try and retcon it. Discovery came in, and particularly Brian Fuller, wanted to make the Klingons much more alien, much more aggressive and clearly different from the humans. Unlike the TOS Klingons, who are just humans painted with slightly darker skin. So what we have is a franchise which has changed itself, but it also fits in. You can look at it as a production change, or you can look at it as an in-universe change. I don't mind this. I don't mind the change either way. Star Trek Discovery was a clear departure from the other Star Trek series that came before it. In particular, the original series, which by the time Discovery aired was nearly 60 years old. So what we have is an in-canon excuse for Star Trek being different after that. I only ask in this is, surely the TNG crew would notice, but no, they wouldn't. Because, like ripples in a pond, you put a splash in, the ripples go out and they flatten out. My views on the Star Trek franchise changing are simply production. Production designs change, and that's the way it is. First Contact, though, does add that choice, but that means that every time the characters go back in time, they're technically altering the future they're going back to. Even if it's just a tiny bit, even if it's a little bit. Like, for example, in Star Trek 4, when they go back to the whales, they take the whales forward. Does that alter the future? Well, of course it does. The whales are now in the future, but also the whales would have got extinct a lot faster. Although humpback whales are now coming back from that due to their protection within certain waters. It's a really interesting dynamic within the Star Trek universe because we have a lot of time travel.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
The original series doesn't really do a lot of time travel. We have City on the Edge of Ferrera and I think one or two other episodes. And it doesn't really alter the history much. It's sort of, they are writing the history. Within First Contact, there's no writing the history other than the Borg have gone. They've caused the damage. They have fought and they have killed people and they have stopped First Contact until the TNG crew get there. So the damage is already done. The history has already changed. So anything from the previous 35, 40 years would have changed also. And it is an interesting theory, and in the multiverse theory, all options are valid. In terms of the TNG, by the Borg going back, they created an alternate timeline. The TNG crew go back, they change the timeline to something close to what they had and go back to that timeline. The altered Borg timeline they were in still exists because it's a multiverse. There's a lot of different ways to look at time travel, but Star Trek tends to look at it as a linear line of which you go backwards and forwards and you fix it and you're gone in that line. You can't do that with Star Trek First Contact and with a lot of the science fiction and a lot of the time travel stuff within Star Trek, because the impact of the event is still there. First Contact with the Vulcans went ahead, but there are people who were meant to be there who weren't there. Enterprise was never meant to encounter the Borg, but they were there. Like, it was a good episode and it was a cool episode, and I get why they did it, but them not mentioning that they're the Borg is a cop-out. So what we have is a possible explanation for the changes within the franchise, and a possible, like, there's certain other episodes where they've progressed and they've changed things, and you can sort of go, oh, how would that work? How does that time travel is very tricky within science fiction. The Doctor would say, timey-wimey.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
I personally think that this is probably one of the best theories that I've read on the internet for why Discovery and Enterprise and TOS all look so vastly different. I think Enterprise and Discovery lead into each other a lot better. I don't think Discovery leads into TOS better. I like also the explanation that I love is that TOS was in standard definition and Strange New Worlds is in high definition. So it's just like there's more detail because there's more detail. What did you think about this theory? I'd really like to postulate some timelines. I'd like to see what people think was actually altered in that time and how my theory works of the ripple in the pond. Make sure to come back for more content on Trek Trav and have a good day.